Okay, so we're going to continue with Revelation. We've made it to Revelation chapter 6. So if you did your homework, which I hope you did, it was quite a lot of reading, and you had to read the scariest parts of Revelation, some of the scariest parts. So what we're going to cover tonight is this large section of the judgments that we read about in Revelation. It goes from chapter 6 all the way through chapter 16. And this is the 7 seals, 7 trumpets, and 7 bowls. And this is a big, complex passage. We're not going to go through it verse by verse. We are going to read the 7 seals. And what I'll do is we'll read what the seal is talking about, and then I will talk to you a little bit about what the trumpet and the bowl that corresponds to that one is about. So I'm about to just give you the fire hydrant approach, and I know that there's no other way to do this unless we go verse by verse through all of this stuff, and that would take us a whole nother year just to get through that. And I figure you don't want to be in Revelation that long. Who wants to be in absolute judgment and destruction for a year? I don't. So, and I'm the guy doing this, so I get to decide. So, what we'll do is try to get through this. This might be a little bit longer than what we normally do. Sorry about that, but I want to kind of get this under our belt so we can move on. Let me tell you a little bit about the schedule real quick, and then we'll move on. So we're going to meet next week, and we'll do Revelation chapter 7. That's the first interlude section, and I'll explain what I mean by that in a minute. And then the week after that, which will be August the 3rd, right? I'm going to be in Gatlinburg on our family vacation, so we won't meet on August the 3rd, but I'll remind you of that. You don't worry about forgetting. I'll tell you plenty of times. Okay, so we're remember Revelation's kind of organized in 4 main visions, and we're still in the second vision right here. It's pretty long, and that's where we're going to be tonight. So let me give you a disclaimer, trigger warning, okay? What I'm going to share with you tonight is we're going to stick to the text, but you'll also hear a little bit about how I interpret this or what I think about this. And I've kind of left that out in the first part of Revelation because there's really no need to get into all that. It's pretty straightforward in the first part of Revelation. But this part is going to kind of challenge the most popular view today. And you've heard me say before, the most popular view of end times today is actually one of the newest views of the end times that nobody even knew about until the 1800s. So what I'm not doing, though, is I'm not saying you have to believe what I believe. Okay, I'm just saying this is how I see this. You're welcome to have a different view. We don't need to fight and argue between these two. I'm not trying to change your mind. That's not the point here tonight. What I want to do is share with you the things that I've found in my study of this, and I want us all to be humble and realize that there has never, ever been absolute agreement about Revelation and end times in all of church history. The only time there might have been agreement is when the 12 apostles were still alive. But even then, you can see in other writings that they weren't all completely in complete agreement and understanding about how all this is going to play out. Okay, so knowing that for 2,000 years of church history, nobody's ever been in absolute agreement about this, then I think we can say we're probably not going to fix that tonight. Yes? Yeah. No, we're not going to fix it tonight. Okay, so I'm going to share what I think about some things. No reason to be triggered by it or anything like that. It may challenge what you think. That's okay. We can have differing views. I believe that Jesus is the Son of God. He was virgin born. He died on the cross for our sins, and he's coming back. I think all of us agree there. Okay, that's actually what matters. What we think about Revelation is important, but it's not going to send us to heaven or hell based on our view of Revelation. Okay, we good? All right. So I'll share some things with you. It's just my views, just my opinion. All right. All right. Now, I know all of you can read every single word of this, right? I do have this in the app where you can download the PDF of this so you can see it better. We're not going to go through this chart. I'm actually going to go through it a different way. But what I did in this PDF is I put the 7 seals, the 7 trumpets, the 7 bowls next to each other. And I did that because it makes it a little easier to see how they're connected, how they relate to each other. Because a lot of times we're looking at words on a page, and it's hard to figure out, like, what is all this trying to tell me? So I'm a very visual type person. I like to take sections of Scripture and put them next to each other because you start noticing things that the author probably intends for you to notice, but we're reading it in English and chronologically, and we miss some of this stuff. So anyway, I did that for you just to kind of let you know how all this fits together, and then I made a simpler version of it, okay? So when we get to the seals, trumpets, and bowls, Revelation 6 through 16, this is kind of how we should be looking at it. The seven seals are the things that are pushed onto the scroll. Remember in chapter 5, the lamb and the scroll, right? John sees the lamb coming before the throne. Nobody's able to open the scroll, but the lamb can. So he's going to open these seals, which holds the scroll closed. That's what seals did back then. Not seals like, but, the ones you put on a scroll. So he's going to break open these seals. What these are, when you put them all next to each other, you start to notice this. What these are, the seals are like the overview. This is the announcement of what's about to go down, okay? The trumpets are like the beginning stages of these judgments, okay? So when you think trumpet, think battle trumpet, okay? In the old war movies, before they would get ready to go into battle, they'd all be lined up, back in, the early American days. We used to just line up and stare at each other and shoot at each other, like take turns. And then the Indians, hid behind trees and killed most of us, and we figured out you can actually hide. That's smarter. Anyway, off subject. But when they were about to go fight, somebody would either blow a trumpet or somebody would yell, "Charge!" Right? Okay, that's how we should think about these trumpets. These are like a battle cry. This is like, all right, charge, go. This is about to happen. Okay, so the seals are like an overview that is being read from a document. So think of the seals this way. Remember back before we went to war after 9/11, the president got on TV to announce we were going to war? Okay, that's how you think about the seals. It's like Jesus saying, it's like his public service announcement. All right, I'm opening this scroll and I'm going to read for you that this is how the war is going to happen. Make sense? Okay? The trumpets are like the first stage where this is going down now. The bowls are the final things. Okay? But when we read them next to each other, you'll notice that they seem to be describing a lot of the same events. So when you read seal number 1 up against trumpet number 1 up against bowl number 1, it looks like it's trying to tell us the same thing, except it's increasing in intensity. That makes sense? So as you read this way, it looks like the seals are the overview, the announcement. The trumpet is like, all right, charge, battle begins. And the bowl is like the final part of that stage. Am I making any sense at all? Okay. So as you read through these, you'll notice that between seal 6 and 7, there's 2 interludes. There's the 144,000 and the multitude. We're going to cover that next week. And then between trumpet 6 and 7, there's 2 more interludes. After trumpet 7, there's 7 interludes. John really likes 7, right? So there's 7 there, and those are really interesting. I can't wait to get into those. Those are fun. And then when you get to the bowls, there's no break, there's no interlude. It's just straight through, like we're finishing this thing. Okay? So does that make sense? The seals are like an overview. The trumpet's the battle horn, charge, let's go. And the bowls are the final thing. This ends it. Okay? So that's how we, at least I hope that's how you can wrap your mind around it. Now, you don't need a fancy eschatology theology system to interpret Revelation. If you pick a system first, you will misread the book. You should get your system, how you think about this, from the book, not the other way around. Make sense? Okay. It's very quiet in here. I might as well just get used to that. It's probably going to be that way the whole time tonight. Okay, what's next here? All right, there's a time span that Revelation tells us about. Okay? If you read through the book of Revelation, you will notice that it'll tell you what the time span of this judgment is, and it's 3.5 years. It tells you several different ways. It uses the term 42 months, and I've got the references there. You can look those up. And one of those, specifically in chapter 11, sounds very much like what Jesus was talking about in Luke 21, which is Luke's version of Matthew 24, the Olivet Discourse, when he's talking about the destruction of Jerusalem. He says it'll be surrounded by armies and it'll be trampled. Revelation uses that same word and says it'll be happening for 42 months. The holy city will be trampled by the Gentiles for 42 months. It also, in another place in that same passage, chapter 11, it calls it 1,260 days. That's 3.5 years. 42 months is 3.5 years. And then it'll also say in Revelation 9 that the time span is a time, that's one time, times, and half a time. That's 3.5 years. Okay? And then in chapter 9, it tells us there'll be these 5 months of extreme torment. Okay? Now, this is where my opinion comes in. It just so happens that that is the exact time span of the Jewish War of AD 66 through 70. It's about mid-66 when it starts out. It's a 3.5 year time span. And the final siege of Jerusalem, where Rome comes in and finally ends the war, is exactly 5 months. So, as I present this to you tonight, I'm going to show you various ways that these events in Revelation connect to that time when Jerusalem was destroyed in that 3.5 year period. So, now, again, this is just some things I've noticed by reading the history, reading Josephus, his historical account. He was an eyewitness. He was there. I've noticed so many connections that in my current view, I should say current because your view on this could change, okay? And mine could too. The more I study, the more I change a lot of things. So I think that what we're about to read in Revelation, this big judgment section that describes a 3.5 year period, I think it's pointing toward that time in our past, not in our future. So anyway, but you don't have to believe that. We can still read the same book. We can still learn a lot from it and have different views, okay? The important thing is, Revelation's main point is, Jesus is Lord. You might want to be on his side. Regardless of whether some of these things happened in the past or if they're all in our future, that same principle goes, yes? Jesus is Lord, he's the king, and you want to be on his team, not on the other team, whether it's past, present, or future, okay? All right, good. Glad we all agree, because we do. Yes. All right, good. Revelation chapter 6. Okay, here we go. You ready? All right. Now we're about to read about 4 horsemen. This is not the first time in your Bible that 4 horsemen are seen in an apocalyptic vision. They're also seen in Zechariah, which is a book I'm sure you've read in your quiet time lately. Haha. Okay. There's 4 horsemen in there, and they're pretty much the same guys, except in Zechariah, they're looking around the earth, and they report back to God that all the earth is at rest. All the land is at rest. So they have to do with either watching over the peace of the land, but in Revelation, they're going to take peace from the land. Okay? And remember, when you read the word earth in Revelation, it means land. When you read the word whole world, the word there in Greek is oikumene, which means a large section of the land like the empire. Okay? So that's what it means. There's only one place that I've found so far where the word cosmos is used, which means the whole world. And that's when it talks about Jesus being king of the whole world. All right? Everything else is about a region of land. Okay, here we go. I'm talking way too much tonight. I'm sorry. Now I watched when the Lamb opened one of the 7 seals, and I heard one of the 4 living creatures. Remember those scary living creatures, the 4 guys that are hanging out, hybrid animal type things? He says with a loud voice like thunder, "Come." And I looked, and behold, a white horse, and its rider had a bow. Not a bow in his hair, a bow and arrow. And a crown was given to him, and he came out conquering and to conquer. Okay? Now, spoiler alert, if you read to the end of Revelation, around chapter 19, you're going to see another person show up on a white horse, and his name is called Faithful and True. Who do you think that is? That'd be Jesus. Okay? So who do you think this might be? Well, he's got a bow and he's got a crown, so he's a king, and he's coming conquering and to conquer. And that last phrase there is the same phrase in chapter 19. So there's a good chance this is Jesus. Okay? I'm not saying that's exactly right. I'm just saying it sure looks that way. So he's got a bow. Now, the last time, or a major time, that a bow is mentioned in your Bible is back in Genesis chapter 9. After the flood, Noah sees what in the clouds? A bow. We call it a rainbow. The word in Hebrew means a bow, like a bow and arrow. Except the one that Noah is seeing, the bow is facing up, not down toward earth. I learned this recently. Ancient Hebrews saw the bow, and it means God's weapon is not facing toward us anymore. That's interesting. Interesting piece of information. But this guy, riding on a white horse, he's pointing it at people. So now it's judgment time, okay? So he's got a bow and a crown's given to him, and he comes out conquering and to conquer. Now, if you compare that with the first trumpet in the first bowl, the first trumpet's in chapter 8, there's hail and fire and blood thrown on the land, and the land and trees and grass are burned. The land, trees, and grass being burned happened in the first century at the destruction of Jerusalem. We'll talk more about that in a minute. And then the first bowl, you've got painful sores that are seen on the people who are worshiping the beast, right? So you see a progression. There's an announcement. There's a guy on a white horse. He's a warrior. He's coming to conquer. And then there's some apocalyptic stuff going on with hail and fire and blood and all this. And that leads to painful sores on people. That'll make more sense in just a minute. The second seal, he opens it, and the second living creature says, "Come." And out came another horse that's bright red. And its rider was permitted to take peace from the earth. Now in Zechariah, the red horse is part of the four that come and say, the whole land's at peace, right? This time, this one's going to be permitted to take away peace from the land. And in what way? Well, so that people will slay one another. Okay, so what we find out is part of this judgment is that people are going to kill each other. Okay, so the horsemen don't have to really do any killing. These are spiritual beings, right? So they're going to be allowing this to happen. Peace is going to be taken away. People are going to fight each other. It's exactly what we read in history in Jerusalem. And he was given a great sword. All right. Now, the interesting thing is, if you read the second trumpet, you find out that a great mountain is thrown into the sea, and the sea becomes blood. Now, remember, we should not be reading this as all of these details being literal events. This is a vision that symbolizes things. So he's seeing these things go on in a vision, and something like that is going to happen in this area. Okay, so he sees a great mountain thrown into a sea. Well, if you go look up a great mountain being thrown into a sea, you'll find out that Jesus talked about this. He's going to Jerusalem. This is in Matthew 21, Mark, toward the end of Mark. If you remember, he curses a fig tree. Do you remember that story where he goes by a tree and it doesn't have any figs, so he curses it and it withers all the way to the roots? And the disciples are shocked. They're standing right outside Jerusalem. They're shocked that this tree died so quickly, even though they've seen Jesus do all these crazy miracles. They're shocked again. You know, that's the disciples, right? That's us. Yes? So they're shocked, and Jesus responds to their shock and surprise by saying, if you just had a little bit of faith, you could say to this mountain, not just any mountain, this mountain. What mountain was he talking about? Well, he's standing right outside the city of Jerusalem, which sits on top of a mountain. Now, it's not a massive, huge Mount Everest mountain, but it is a mountain. There's a valley all the way around the thing. He says, you will say to this mountain to be thrown into the sea. So, What I think this part is talking about, it's talking about the destruction of Jerusalem. And then in the second bowl, it's pretty much reiterating the same thing. The sea is becoming blood. Now, by the way, I'm skipping over so much stuff. There's 3,854 words in your notes, so there's much more you can read on your own time. We'd be here forever if I said everything. But here's what we do know about the sea becoming blood. If you read Josephus, the War of the Jews, or the Jewish War revolt, you will find many places where he describes so many dead bodies in the Sea of Galilee that blood was flowing down the Jordan River all the way into or by Jerusalem. There were so many people killed in the sea and on the shores of the sea. He said the shores were littered in dead bodies, and blood was flowing out of the Sea of Galilee down the river. So these events literally did happen. The sea did become blood in the first century, and the Jordan River, which we're going to read about rivers and springs in just a minute, same thing happened. The water was so contaminated that people were dying from drinking it. That's what Josephus tells us in his historical account. Okay, now we got the third seal. He opened the third seal and heard the third living creature say, "Come." And I looked, and behold, a black horse, and its rider had a pair of scales in his hand. And I heard what seemed to be a voice in the midst of the four living creatures saying, "A quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, and do not harm the oil and wine." And we all understand what all that means, right? What this is speaking of famine, severe famine. A pair of scales is where you would weigh out and ration food. And the prices that are listed here are famine prices. Okay? These things did not cost that much. You would get way more wheat and barley for a denarius than what's listed here. So things have gotten really, really expensive because there's a whole lot less of it and people are starving. And the phrase, "do not harm the oil and wine," oil and wine was used in the temple. They're also sometimes seen as luxury items, especially if you're in a famine. So anyway, if we compare that to the third trumpet and third bowl, we find out that this famine goes beyond just food. It's also affected their water supply. So a star falls from heaven, and if you go read that passage, let me see if I can bring it up here. Yeah, so this great star falls from heaven and falls on a third of the rivers and springs. So all of their water supply, or at least a third of it, is contaminated. And the third bowl, rivers and springs become blood, and it tells us why that's happening to them. Because this city, this region of land, Jerusalem, they have shed the blood of prophets and saints. Now, if you look up that phrase, that is used exclusively of Jerusalem. They are the city who have always killed their own prophets and killed the saints. Jesus said this in Matthew 23. If you remember when he was chewing out the Pharisees in Matthew 23, we all love that passage, right? He calls them whitewashed tombs and all that kind of stuff. One of the main things he says is that you and your ancestors always have killed the prophets, and you shed the blood of prophets. So that gives us more indication that what we're reading about here is going to happen to Jerusalem. Okay? I want to make sure I'm not skipping over too much here. I'll give you time for questions at the end. All right, now he's going to open the fourth seal. So he's breaking open the fourth one. And John hears the fourth living creature say, "Come." And I looked, and behold, a pale horse. Now, the color here is actually a pale green. It's sickness. Okay? And its rider's name was Death. Capital D, Death. His rider, the name of this guy is Death. And Hades followed him. Now, what is Hades? You remember? It's not hell. It's the place where dead people go. Well, that is until Jesus shows up and does what he does, right? So believers, people who trust in Jesus, when they die, they go to be with Jesus. They don't go to Hades anymore. But before Jesus did what he did, everybody went to Sheol. That's the Hebrew word for Hades. Hades is the Greek word. It's the same place. And we're told by Jesus in the parable of the rich man and Lazarus, there's a separation between the righteous and the unrighteous in this place called Hades in Greek. So death is the rider, and Hades is following him. Now, so if you think of Hades as the place of the dead, well, you need to die to go to Hades. So death is the name of the rider, and Hades is, I guess, in a sidecar, going along behind him. I don't know. And they're given authority over a fourth of the land. It's translated earth, but it means land. To kill with the sword. Okay, so here's the four categories of judgments. They're going to be killed with the sword and with famine, pestilence, which could either be, this is like disease, starvation, that's famine. Pestilence could either be, just lost my train of thought. It can be all kinds of things. Sometimes it's locusts coming on the land and destroying the crops and that kind of thing. But in this context, it seems to be talking about diseases. And by a wild beast. Now, are beasts going to come up later in Revelation? Yeah, and it's actually the same word in chapter 13 where the beasts are described, the first beast and the second beast. It's the same exact word here. So there's four categories there. If you go read Ezekiel, you'll see the same thing. Same four categories when he's talking about judgment on Jerusalem. Okay? All right, so if you compare that with the fourth trumpet and the fourth bowl, in the trumpet, the sun and moon and stars are darkened. But in the fourth bowl, the opposite happens. The sun is shining so bright it's scorching people like fire. Now, after the fourth trumpet, you get this weird little statement where John sees an eagle flying directly overhead, and the eagle's talking. And it says, "Woe, woe, woe to the inhabitants of the land." 3 woes. Now, when you first read that, you don't know you're supposed to be counting woes, because John doesn't give you that. He doesn't tell you. The cookies are not on the bottom shelf. Okay? He also does this in John's gospel. He talks about there's 7 signs that Jesus performs, and he counts the first few for you, and then he stops counting. He's expecting you to count. Right? He does it again here. The eagle, which by the way is a symbol of Rome, that is their number one symbol, the eagle. He hears an eagle saying, "Woe, woe, woe." And then if you keep on reading, you'll notice he says, "The first woe has passed." And you're like, oh wait, we're supposed to be counting woes. That starts in this passage. Okay? Okay. So I'll come back to the woes as we go. Now then he opens the 5th seal. This is really important. I saw under the altar the souls of those who had been slain for the word of God and for the witness they had borne. Okay, so these are the martyrs. These are people who died for their faith because they wouldn't shut up about Jesus. That's who these people are. And by this time, if this is being written in the mid-60s AD, by this time there had been quite a few martyrs. Not only in Jerusalem, because Jerusalem was killing Christians like crazy, but then Rome steps in when Nero comes to power and he starts killing thousands of them. Okay? So John sees the souls of the martyrs, and they're under the altar in heaven. And what are they doing? They cried out with a loud voice, "O sovereign Lord, holy and true, how long before you will judge and avenge our blood on those who dwell on the land?" Then they were each given a white robe. Remember, that's purity, right? Righteousness. And told to rest a little longer until the number of their fellow servants and their brothers should be complete, who were to be killed as they themselves had been. So you've got John sees the souls of martyrs crying out for justice and vengeance, or for their blood to be avenged, right? They're crying out for that, and they're told, presumably by God, there's still more of you we're waiting on to arrive. So there's going to be more people killed for their faith before the judgment on them is played out, on those who persecuted them. Okay, now the reason why I said this is really important is because this is going to keep coming up throughout Revelation. The cry of the martyrs for justice or judgment and for their blood to be avenged, that's going to keep popping up. You just have to be paying attention. Okay? So the judgments on the land are God's answer to the prayers of the martyrs. Okay? All right, so in the fifth seal, you've got the martyrs crying out. The fifth trumpet, the abyss is opened. The heck is the abyss? Well, it's another thing down there somewhere. And it's where all the evil spirits live, the abyss. Okay, Jude talks about this, and Peter does as well in one of his letters, about the rebellious angels being locked in chains of gloomy darkness. That's the abyss. Okay, so every time you see the abyss being opened, you're going to notice demonic things coming out of it in Revelation. All right, so there's these weird, very, very weird creatures described that come out of the abyss. And they look like locusts, but they also have human faces, and they're wearing armor like soldiers, and they have like scorpion tails, and they can sting people, and it's very painful. And they're led by somebody named Apollyon. That's what Revelation tells us. All right, so when you read that passage, it's like, what? Was John like on shrooms? What is he seeing here, right? This is crazy stuff. And then we're told, just in passing, the first woe has passed. 2 more are to come, right? So he gives us a clue. Oh, we're supposed to be counting those. All right, so, and then the fifth bowl, we're going to come back to those scorpion locust people. The beast kingdom is plunged into darkness. That does not mean it's destroyed. That means it gets more evil. It's plunged into even more darkness. And people are gnawing their tongues in starvation and in anger. Okay? So that's what's going on. We know that stuff happened in the first century as well. Now, let's talk about these guys. What are these locusts that have golden crowns and human faces with hair on their crowns and iron breastplates and scorpion tails led by some random being called Apollyon? Well, I've got an idea. Looks a lot like that. Now, you might think I'm crazy. Just hang on. This is what Roman soldiers looked like in the first century. We found their armor, their shields. We know exactly what they looked like in the first century. On their shields, they had 4 wings. How many wings does a locust have? We'll take a guess. 4. Okay. They also have these pointed tails on them. They have gold crown looking things on their head with hair. Actually, most of the soldiers will look like the one that's got the crooked rooster head thing going on, right? And the spears of the people behind them kind of looks like a pointed tail. Now, you say, oh, come on now, you're stretching it. Oh, well, I might be. But it just so happens that Legion 15, their name is Apollinarius. And that's Latin. In Greek, it would be Apollyon. And that was the god over that legion in the Roman mind. The 15th legion of the Roman army was one of the 4 main legions that attacked Jerusalem in the first century. There were 4 main legions, and there were parts of 2 other legions that came from the south, and they all met up at Jerusalem to finish the job. And this legion was one of them. And this is what they looked like marching toward the city. So I'm just saying it could be John is seeing a vision of these weird-looking things, and Roman soldiers happen to look a lot like what he was seeing. I'm just saying that's an option. You don't have to believe that. Just throwing it out there, okay? I just think the connections are pretty close. And I could be telling you much more connections of the first century stuff, but we'd be here all night. All right, now let's look at the 6th seal. When he opened the 6th seal, I looked, and behold, there was a great earthquake. And the sun became black as sackcloth, and the full moon became like blood, and the stars of the sky fell to the earth, and the fig tree, like as the fig tree sheds its winter fruit when shaken by a gale, a storm. The sky vanished like a scroll that is being rolled up, and every mountain and island was removed from its place. Okay, pretty crazy sounding stuff, right? It goes on. Then the kings of the earth and the great ones and the generals and the rich and the powerful and everyone, slave and free, hid themselves in the caves and among the rocks of the mountains, calling to the mountains and rocks, fall on us and hide us from the face of him who was seated on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of their wrath has come, and who can stand? Well, that's a pretty good question. Who can stand against the Lamb? Not us, right? So what's happening here? Okay, he's seeing in a vision all these cataclysmic things happening, and people, no matter what social status they are running for the hills and hiding in the caves, and they're so terrified that they're hoping the cave will cave in on them because it's so bad. Okay? That happened exactly in the first century. Okay? Maybe could happen again. I'm just saying it for sure did because we can read about it in history. People of all walks of life died in caves trying to hide from the armies. Either they starved to death or sometimes the earthquakes, because there were many earthquakes during the Jewish war, caused them to crumble down and fall on top of people, and they died. Lots of people died in the caves, and some died underneath the city of Jerusalem in the catacombs, little tunnels underneath the city. There were many, many dead bodies there. Now, if we compare that with the sixth trumpet and the sixth bowl, in the sixth trumpet we find out that 4 angels are released from the Euphrates River, and we're told 30,000 troops. Now, if you read in your Bible, your English Bibles, I'm not sure why they do this, but it says in the English Standard Version at least, that the number of the troops were twice 10,000 times 10,000. That's what the ESV says. I don't know if you got a different translation, it may say something different. But the Greek says dismirius myrius. Dismirius is 20,000. Myrius is 10,000. So the Greek, if you just read it literally, is 30,000. Okay? Just so happens to be the exact amount of troops that marched on Jerusalem in the first century. 4 Roman legions, was 20,000 people. They had about 10,000 from the south come up to meet at Jerusalem. You had 30,000 troops marching on Jerusalem, Roman troops. And then we're told in passing, again, by the way, the second woe has passed. Keep counting. And if we compare that with the sixth bowl, the Euphrates is mentioned again. It dries up to make way for the armies, and they gather at Armageddon. Where's Armageddon? A lot of people think it's at a place called Megiddo. It's a place outside Jerusalem. Here's the only problem with that idea. The word in Greek is Har-Megiddon. It's actually got an H at the beginning because it's got a rough breathing mark over the A in Greek. I won't bore you with that. But here's what Har-Megiddon means. It's actually 2 words. It means Mount of Assembly. But we're also told, John says, that we need to be paying attention to what this means in Hebrew. He does this a few times. He'll say, in Hebrew it means, this. Mount of Assembly in the Old Testament is always Jerusalem. Why is it Jerusalem? Because that's where you can meet with Yahweh. Because that's where the temple is. It's the Mount of Assembly, the Mount of Meeting. So Armageddon is not Megiddo. The very first part of the word means Har. It's a mountain. If you go to Megiddo today, there is no mountain there. It cannot be Megiddo. Okay? There's a little hill right there where the city, the fortress used to be, but it's not natural. That's a city that's fallen down, and there's a mound there, but there's no mountain. Okay? So they're gathering at the Mount of Assembly. That's Jerusalem. That's the place where the temple is. Okay? 7th seal. We're almost done. You're doing so well. Just hang with me. When the Lamb opened the seventh seal, there was silence in heaven for about half an hour. This would have stood out to John because so far all he's heard is a lot of loud stuff going on in heaven. That's probably why he was like, hey, it got quiet for a second. Yeah. Then I saw the seven angels who stand before God, and the seven trumpets were given to them. So the seventh seal overlaps with the trumpets because what he sees when the seventh seal is opened is that seven trumpets are coming. Another angel came and stood at the altar with a golden censer, and he was given much incense to offer with the prayers of all the saints. Remember those souls under the altar crying out, praying for justice and judgment? So here it is. And the smoke of the incense with the prayers of the saints rose before God and from the hand of the angels. So what are we being told here? God's about to answer their prayer. All right. Then the angel took the censer filled with fire from the altar. Now what's that censer filled with? The prayers of the saints. He takes it, throws it on the land, and there are peals of thunder and rumblings. The Greek word there means loud voices. Flashes of lightning and an earthquake. A lot of earthquakes in this book, isn't there? All right, if you compare those, the seventh trumpet and the seventh bowl and the seventh trumpet, he also hears loud voices. And here's what they're saying. The kingdom of the world has become the kingdom of Christ. Good news. Right? What is as long as you're hanging out with God and his kingdom? But if you're the kingdom of the world, this is bad news for you because it means he's about to show up, and whatever area of land he's about to show up on, that kingdom is about to be over, and his kingdom will rule. Okay? Seventh bowl, there's another earthquake. Surprise, surprise. The city is split into three parts. Here's what we know about the first century destruction of Jerusalem, that during that 3.5-year period, there were three parts. There were three different groups fighting each other within Jerusalem before Rome ever shows up. Rome comes and shows up in 66, starts the battle. The guy there, what is his name? Gallus was the second name. He's about to defeat the whole thing. He gets right up to the temple. He's won the war, and for no reason in the world, Josephus said, he turned away and all of his soldiers fled. They had already won, and they took off scared to death, and nobody could figure out why. That made a big break in the war, and during that break, the Jews decided it'd be a good idea, let's all fight each other. Genius, right? And there was three groups fighting within the walls of Jerusalem, and when Rome shows back up, they're coming to finish that. They're coming to do away with all this infighting within Jerusalem, and that's what they do. So the city split into three parts is what John sees. We also see that in the first century events. And he sees 100-pound hailstones. Hailstones are big white stones. These are 100 pounds. Like, this makes softball-size hail look like nothing. Those are rain, right? Here's an interesting connection. Josephus describes the Romans building catapults outside the city and flinging 100-pound white stones over the walls of the city. And sometimes they would light it on fire. So it would look like 100-pound hailstones coming from heaven if you're inside the city because you can't see over the walls. They're huge, right? So these things are coming around. And there used to be people, Josephus says, they started putting people up on the wall to watch. And they would turn back and yell, "The stone cometh." Here it comes. And everybody would move out of the way. And the Romans started figuring out, well, they can see this coming. It's a bright white rock. So they started covering it in black tar and throwing them at night. And nobody could see it coming. Killed thousands of people. All right? So just a little historical connection there. All right? Okay. Good grief, that was a lot. Conclusion, what does this mean? Well, I'm just giving you my opinion here. The timeline of judgment in Revelation, which is 3.5 years, told to us three different ways, matches the timeline of the Jewish War, 66 to 70 AD. The timeline of the Roman persecution of Christians, which was also exactly 3.5 years, done by Nero, matches the timeline of the beast authority to kill the saints in Revelation 13. We're going to get to that later on when we get to that section. The timeline of the Gentiles trampling the holy city is 42 months, which matches the timeline of Rome's attack on Jerusalem. The historical record of the Jewish war mentions many events that match the judgments in Revelations, or at least it's very closely matched. And John tells us 10 times in Revelation that these events, at least some of them, were going to happen soon and that the time was near. Remember that in chapter 1? It also says it toward the end. The Jewish war began within 1 to 2 years after Revelation is written, if Revelation was written in 64 or 65 AD, which is the view that I hold, and I think there's a lot of good evidence for it. So, what I'm not saying, I am not saying that everything in Revelation happened in the past. I am not saying that. But my opinion of my research so far, my conclusion is that many of the events in Revelation did happen in the first century at the destruction of Jerusalem, but not all of them. There's still a good bit left to go that's in Revelation that has not happened yet, in my view. So anyway, that's the conclusion that I come to. You can come to a different conclusion. That's totally fine. We still love each other. We're still family, and we can have different views about some things. As long as we believe that Jesus is the King of the universe and that he should alone be worshiped and served, we can have a different view on the Revelation. It's all right. Guess what? John's disciples didn't understand Revelation fully. Good chance we're not going to get it all figured out. All right? Okay, here's what we're going to do next week, and I'll open it up for questions. All right, next week we're going to do Revelation chapter 7. All right, it's a little bit shorter passage, only one chapter this time. And we're going to talk about the 144,000. And if you're familiar with the Jehovah's Witnesses, they used to go around saying that only 144,000 people would ever get to heaven. And then eventually they figured out that, well, it must be full by now, and now they stopped telling people that. But anyway, so it's the 144,000 that are mentioned, and then he sees another group of people that is just a big multitude of all kinds of people. And we're going to talk about who those are. So what I want you to do is read Revelation chapter 7, and I want you to think about these questions. Who are these people in these two groups? Because they are two different groups. Who are they? And what are the differences between these two groups? Okay? Now, when I say who are they, I don't mean what are their exact names. I'm just saying what kind of people's in the 144,000, what kind of people are in the multitude that John sees. Because these are clearly two different groups. So just pay attention to that, and that's what we'll talk about next time. So next time, I'm not going to fire hydrant you for an hour. We're actually going to be able to go through that a little bit slower. Okay? All right. So that's what we'll do next time.